Good evening. I'm Randall Gill, the president of the Boynton Beach Historical Society, and we welcome you all to this program tonight. Our speaker is Donn Colee, and he's been with us in the past, and we appreciate him being with us again tonight. Donn has written a new book entitled Legends and Lore of Fort Lauderdale's New River. And I've had an opportunity to read the book, and it's a fascinating book. I really enjoyed it, and I hope that all of you will get a chance to read it too. Donn has a lot of interesting stories, and I especially enjoyed the stories about the ancient Native Americans and the Seminoles, who had many legends that they passed down through generations about the beginning of this beautiful new river. They believe that the Great Spirit came and stirred up the ground, and it rumbled, and in the morning, when the Native Americans got up, they looked out and saw this beautiful new river flowing through the forest. And Donn goes on to do some research in the book about what could have possibly happened on that night. Was this a true event? And he talks with scientists and geologists, and it's a really neat part of the book. The book also looks at the lives of the early settlers and also some of Donn's family members from the 1800s. And so we're really happy to have Donn with us and to share with us his research and just some of the stories and events from his newest book. So welcome, Donn.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Anne, are we going straight into the presentation now?
Yes, please.
Okay, we can do that. We can do that. First of all, thank you, Randall, and thanks to Barbara and Anne for inviting me. Members and guests of the Boynton Beach Historical Society, thank you for being here tonight and enduring the trials and tribulations of Zoom meetings. I have fond memories, as we spoke about just a few minutes ago, of my first in-person presentation to your organization about my first book, Towers in the Sand, The History of Florida Broadcasting. We're all looking forward to getting back together in person when this terrible COVID pandemic is finally under control, hopefully not too long. To ensure that I don't forget anything, I prepared a PowerPoint presentation that I'll narrate, and I'll be referring to a script here. So if you're seeing my face during the presentation, I apologize for not making good eye contact, but I want to make sure that I get the story down correctly. So without further ado, let's see if this works. I'm going to share my screen to the PowerPoint presentation, and it appears to be right there. And it looks like we have a go. Anne, are we seeing the presentation?
Looks good.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much. Let me just get this to full screen. PowerPoint slideshow. Play from start. Okay. There we go. Looks like we're going. Any of you that see these, see the little tiles, the tiles of the people who are watching on the screen, you can actually drag those down to the bottom of the screen so that they don't interfere with some of the things that may be on the slides themselves. So I will leave that to you to decide whether or not you want to do that. So Legends and Lore of Fort Lauderdale's New River began as a personal quest to solve a Colee family mystery that's been circulating for generations and documented in many books, including Marjorie Stoneman Douglas's wonderful book, Everglades, River of Grass. In brief, The story says that members of my family who immigrated from England to St. Augustine in 1821 were murdered on the banks of Fort Lauderdale's New River by angry Seminole Indians. The story gained notoriety in 1934 when the Colee Massacre story was memorialized in rock and bronze by the Daughters of the American Revolution and the city of Fort Lauderdale. The plaque read, "This monument marks site of the historical Colee Massacre, which effectually destroyed the earliest known white settlement on New River in a surprise attack by Indians following the Seminole Indian War, 1842. Most town residents attended the ceremony since schools and businesses were closed by order of the mayor. Various dignitaries spoke of the brave early settlers. Members of St. Augustine's Colee family, including Colonel Harold W. Colee, then a director of the State Chamber of Commerce, and on the governor's cabinet, were honored. And afterwards, everyone went to tea at the New River home of Mrs. Ivy Stranahan. The only problem, it didn't happen to that family on that date or in that location. However, there was a pioneer family murdered on the banks of New River in the early 1800s. And that story is as gripping as you'll find in any current mystery. But for that, I'm afraid you'll have to read the book. Having found the answer to the massacre mystery, I realized there was a much bigger story to be told about New River, one that encompasses Florida's entire East Coast, including where many of you live in Boynton Beach. But before I go there, I'd like to talk about another of my curiosities. Why was the river called New? Was it dredged in the early 1900s as part of the Everglades, the massive scheme to reclaim the Everglades for agriculture and development? Nope. I learned that New River was there before Henry Flagler's railroad steamed south through the newly platted town of Fort Lauderdale in 1896, before boats navigated the length of Florida's east coast on an inland waterway in 1895. New River was there before 1894 when Major Nathan Boynton stepped off a boat south of Lake Worth and bought 400 acres for his new town of Boynton Beach. I learned that from the Boynton Beach Historical Society website. New River was there before weary and jostled southbound stagecoach passengers camped overnight on its banks in 1893 before crossing the river on a hand-pulled ferry en route to today's Miami. New River was there before the American flag flew over the new state of Florida in 1845, before it became a US territory in 1822. In fact, the first known documentation of New River is a 1613 map on which the label R Novo appears in Latin. An answer, perhaps, of how New River got its name is in the first chapter of my book. It's an Indian legend said to have been passed down through generations. The legend was published in the Fort Lauderdale Sentinel in 1921, a decade after the town was officially recognized. Quoting from the legend, "Beautiful New River came in the night, that where this mysterious river now traces her course to the sea, one time was wild tropical jungles or pine forests. The tribes living in their huts had gone to sleep after the day's hunt, when suddenly they were awakened by thundering noises and the earth trembling beneath them, like the trembling of the deer when brought to bay by the hunter's dogs. On venturing out the next morning, a mighty and majestic river flowed through the forest. They called this water Himarshi, meaning the new water, which was changed by white settlers to New River. The newspaper went on to say that geologists who examined the limestone rocks on the ridge that runs the length of the Atlantic coastline said that the legend is, quote, probably true in every particular. Pure fiction, said the day's historians and engineers. So if so, why did the river have at least 2 whirlpools said to be 90 to 125 feet deep? Published reports say that kids playing on the riverbank could toss a 2x4 into the whirlpool at Sailboat Bend, right about there, only to have it resurface 2 miles downriver at Tarpon Bend, which is right about there. Alas, the whirlpools are no more, silted up by dirty water flowing through the canal, dredged from New River to Lake Okeechobee as part of the early 1900s scheme to drain the Everglades. The champion of that effort, Florida's 19th governor, Napoleon Bonaparte Broward, namesake of today's Broward County. But let's go back in time again to the family of Searles and Frankie Lewis. They were the first documented white settlers on New River, British loyalists from Virginia and South Carolina who, like the wind from the Carolinas, fled to the Bahamas after the American Revolution. Soon after, they moved to the Spanish colony of La Florida, settling on New River. Here's a map showing the Lewis homestead and plantation with some of today's landmarks. The homestead was right over here, and the plantation was right over here between the forks. And you'll see I put the FEC Railway new features, which of course were not there in 1733, I-95, etc. You'll see those in all of the maps in the book to try and help pinpoint for people who know the geography kind of where things happen. That was always something that I like to know. Entering the river and spotting the Spanish spies, 3 Spanish spies. Okay, I got one step ahead of myself, okay? So here's the map, we've seen that. Documency of their residency was the result of a secret spy mission in 1793, ordered by the Spanish governor of the Florida colony from his headquarters in St. Augustine. The governor feared that associates of William Augustus Bowles, a British-American adventurer and quite the spiffy dresser, were living at New River and might be planning an insurrection to oust the Spanish government and convert Florida into a sovereign Indian nation. 3 Spanish spies were dispatched with a cover story that they were hitching a ride on the mail boat between St. Augustine and Havana when they ran out of water and had to replenish their barrels at New River. Entering the river and spotting a homestead, the spies found Captain Joseph Robbins staying at the Lewis's house. William Augustus Bowles was nowhere to be found, probably never lived there. Cordially, though, Robbins invited the spies to dinner. Over freshwater trout skillfully cooked by Robbins' wife and plenty of rum and wine, Robbins told the spies that Searles, Frankie, and their sons had gone to the Bahamas for supplies. But there was more. As the evening wore on and the libation flowed, Robbins told his visitors that he, in fact, was an associate of Bowles and had participated in a previous insurrection against the Spanish government. Mission accomplished. The spies sailed back to St. Augustine and filed a detailed report on their findings. The governor in St. Augustine promptly dispatched the report to the governor general in Havana. But as often was the case, Havana apparently ignored the warnings from its relatively insignificant colony, and nothing ever came of the incident. But since the Lewis family residence had been so thoroughly documented in 1793, 3 decades later, the then widowed Frankie Lewis became a major South Florida landholder. When the United States government took possession of Florida from the Spanish in 1822, it granted big blocks of land called donations to the people who could prove residency prior to the transfer. This was an effort by the US government to preserve the new territory's meager population. The Frankie Lewis donation, showed here in the red box, comprised 1 square mile, 640 acres of land in what is now the heart of downtown Fort Lauderdale and the historic subdivision of Colee Hammock. We'll have more on that later. When Florida became a US territory, it triggered dramatic growth as eager Americans sought new opportunities and land in the southern frontier. The only thing holding it back, the so-called Indian problem. The Spanish government had generally gotten along well with the native peoples, but the United States was in no mood to tolerate people who didn't want to leave their native lands to make way for the Americans. In 1823, the government coerced tribal leaders to a meeting at Moultrie Creek, just south of St. Augustine, proffering a treaty that would have forced their tribes to relocate to a 4 million acre reservation in central Florida. Only a few chiefs signed the treaty, and they quickly realized their mistake. Much of the land was unsuitable for agriculture, and it didn't have enough game to support their families. Plus, it was miles from the coast, making fishing and trade impossible. This was no place to call home. The chiefs soon fled the reservation and led their people back to the Florida homelands. Then Andrew Jackson became president of the United States in 1829. A military man to his core, with no tolerance for the Indians' claim to their homelands, Jackson signed into law the Indian Removal Act of 1830, giving the government unlimited power to cancel existing treaties and move all Indians to land west of the Mississippi. 2 years later, Seminole leaders were again summoned to meet with government men who told them they were going to leave their Florida homelands forever, voluntarily or by force. Only 15 Seminole leaders put their marks on the Treaty of Payne's Landing. One who refused was Seminole leader Osceola, who was said to have walked up to the signing table, pulled out his knife, and stabbed it through the treaty into the wooden table below, saying, "That's how I sign." The treaty, like the others, did not solve Florida's Indian problem. Skirmishes, followed by negotiations, followed by more skirmishes until, just after Christmas 1835, the Indians took matters into their own hands, ambushing and killing Major Francis Dade and most of his 100 soldiers en route to Tampa. The Second Seminole War had begun. It did not go well for the Americans, accustomed as they were to fighting orderly wars against the British. The Seminoles would strike, then flight into the wilderness, eventually moving south. A particularly difficult battle was fought and lost by American troops on the Loxahatchee River at today's Riverbend Park near Jupiter. Reinforcements, in the form of a battalion of Tennessee volunteers under the leadership of Major William Lauderdale, were recruited to join the Second Battle of Loxahatchee. With fresh fighters, it was an American victory. But the Seminole leader, Sam Jones, escaped south toward the Everglades. Major Lauderdale's troops were dispatched in pursuit, accompanied by a construction battalion to hack a road 63 miles from Jupiter to New River. That road is today's military trail. Arriving at Fort Lauderdale, arriving at New River, got ahead of myself there, didn't I? Arriving at New River, Lauderdale's soldier built a fort where the river forks. The fort was named in his honor, Fort Lauderdale. From there, they conducted the first US military encroachment into the Everglades, looking for Sam Jones at Pine Island, which at the time was actually an island. Again, the Seminoles fired, then fled deeper into the Everglades. Its mission compromised, its defenders demoralized, and the logistics of maintaining, protecting, and provisioning the inland fort imposing, the first Fort Lauderdale was abandoned. But not for long. 2 more forts were built, the last one on the beach, where it could be provisioned by sea. The final Fort Lauderdale is near today's Bahia Mar Hotel, or was near today's Bahia Mar Hotel, and it was manned continually until February 1842. The Second Seminole War ended without victory for either side. The unconquered Indians retreated to the Everglades, where they remain today. New River was quiet again, and because of the murders I mentioned earlier, it remained quiet for decades. It wasn't until 1889 that a significant repopulation of New River began. The catalyst was when the Dade County seat was moved from Miami to Juneau, which then was at the north end of Lake Worth, near today's Lost Tree Village. Remember, back then, Dade County stretched all the way up to the St. Lucie Inlet. One of the county commission's first orders of business from the new courthouse was to construct a county road from the south end of Lake Worth to Lemon City, today's North Miami. The road would have to cross New River. Guy Metcalf was the publisher of Southeast Florida's first newspaper, the Tropical Sun, which had moved to Juneau to cover the county commission. While continuing to operate the newspaper, Metcalf recast himself as a road builder and received the contract to build the new county road. Now, Metcalf was also a shrewd businessman and an opportunist. He established a stagecoach line to run on the new road he was building. Then, realizing the 65-mile trip would take 2 days and that New River was the halfway point, travelers would need a place to stay. He recruited his cousin, Frank Stranahan, a former steel worker from Ohio, to construct and manage a tent camp at New River. Now, here's a sketch drawn by Frank showing 7 large Adirondack-style tents, 2 for sleeping, 1 for gents, and the other for ladies, kitchen and dining tents, storage for feed and provisions, Stranahan's room and office, all gathered around a large campfire. Now this map is a little confusing because when Frank made it, he put north at the bottom and south up at the top. And of course it jingles back and forth in terms of what's upside down and not, but it's a pretty remarkable piece of artwork from a long, long time ago. Frank also built and operated the hand-pulled ferry across the river. A modern stagecoach running regular schedule of trips between the southeast population centers around Lake Worth, New River, and Biscayne Bay meant the demise of the storied barefoot mailmen who had carried the mail walking along the beaches for more than 2 decades. Frank Stranahan, too, was ambitious. In addition to becoming postmaster, he soon established a trading post where Indians could exchange their pelts, furs, and trinkets for household goods, guns, ammunition, and whiskey. In 1899, when the New River settlement had sufficient number of children, the citizens built a one-room schoolhouse. Miss Ivy Julia Cromarty from Lemon City was its first teacher. The fetching 18-year-old quickly attracted Frank's attention, and after a short courtship, including romantic boat trips on the river, they married. The stagecoach line and its overnight camp were a welcomed and generally reliable alternative to travel by boat on the dangerous Atlantic Ocean. But it had its limitations, hauling freight and food being the most significant. What Florida needed, it was felt, was an inland waterway to connect the state's underdeveloped southern half with ports and population to the north. In 1881, 4 enterprising St. Augustine entrepreneurs incorporated the Florida Coastline Canal and Transportation Company. They secured the state contract to dredge an intracoastal waterway. The dredges began digging near St. Augustine in 1882. My great-great-great-grandfather, James Lewis Colee, was one of the 4 original partners. He also served as the canal company's engineer, planning and supervising construction until the canal was finished. Along the way, he invested in hundreds of acres of South Florida waterfront land. I wish I had those deeds today. By the early 1890s, the company's dredges were working reaches between Jupiter Inlet, Lake Worth, and New River. Canal construction required that workmen have their supplies shipped southward to work sites along the advancing canal. They also lived at the work sites. One of those work sites was at New River's Tarpon Bend. We saw this map earlier talking about the Lewis family, but I wanted to show you where the camp was. It was named for James Lewis Colee. Decades later, Mary Brickell purchased the old Frankie Lewis donation we spoke of earlier. Seeing population growth and the corresponding demand for more home sites, Mrs. Brickell platted her land encompassing the old work camp, which is marked by the red arrow. They named the subdivision Colee Hammock. Today, it remains one of Fort Lauderdale's historic luxury communities. The southern leg of the Florida Coastline Canal was completed in 1895. Steamboats carrying goods and passengers, as well as yachts of wealthy Northerners, could travel safely between the growing population and commercial centers around Lake Worth and the fertile land at New River. The next year, 1896, Henry Flagler's Florida East Coast Railway arrived in Boynton Beach, then Fort Lauderdale, then Miami. Florida's coastal wilderness was no more. I have just scratched the surface of the stories and legends and lore of Fort Lauderdale's New River. I haven't told you about some of the other interesting characters. Richard J. Dickey Bowles, swampland salesman extraordinaire. Wash Jenkins, keeper of the U.S. Life-Saving Station number 4 on the beach, and by all accounts, a thoroughly nice guy. Philemon N. Bryan, considered by many to be the founding father of Fort Lauderdale, and many more. The book covers New River's history through 1928, when the final sandbar blocking the new Port Everglades was blasted through, opening a new era for Southeast Florida. I hope you'll consider buying and reading Legends and Lore of Fort Lauderdale's New River. I think you'll enjoy it, learn more about Florida's history, perhaps shed a tear and have a laugh. You can buy the book at my website, DonnColeyWriter.com, my Facebook page at Legends Lore New River, and retailers including Barnes & Noble and Amazon. I thank you for the opportunity to talk with you. And now we'll switch screens so I can answer any questions you might have. Now let's see if I can figure out how to switch screens. Anne, are you able to switch the screens? Let me do that.
Sure. Hold on one second.
There we go.
Okay. So does anybody have questions for Donn?
Oh, I couldn't have told you everything.
This is amazing research. How in all your research, you've got to have at least another 2 or 3 books worth, I figure.
Well, I actually do have another idea for another book around New River. And I didn't know anything about New River any more than somebody who occasionally maybe stayed in a hotel down there. But as I said in the presentation, the more I learned about it, the more I found it just fascinating. And I think that's true in so many places in our state. You know, once you peel back the onion a little bit, you find all sorts of great stories. But I do have another idea for another book around New River, kind of taking it from 1928 when the port opened, and telling some of the stories that happened after that, including Prohibition and a big shipbuilding operation during the war effort and such. And I am working on another book at the present time that's probably going to be a year or so from now, that takes place in St. Augustine. So, you know, I really enjoy writing, and thankfully people have said that they have enjoyed some of what they've read. So that's a great pleasure.
You're a great
Miss
storyteller.
Jillian?
Thank you.
Yes.
Miss Jillian, did you have a question?
No, I just wanted to say hello to Donn because I had met him when he wrote his other book, and he had quoted my information at WXCL. But I find that very fascinating. I'm sorry the British behaved so badly.
Well, you know, I think you can go back in history. It's really hard to kind of go back in history and paint who was right and who was wrong. It's like, you know, all of the tragic things that happened to the native peoples who were living in this state and you know, throughout the country at that time. But, you know, the times were different, the people were different, the needs were different. And, you know, it was a different time, and we can only look back. You know, as they say, the only way to, you know, the best thing about history is you can learn from it and try not to repeat some of the mistakes that may have been made. And I hope that's going to be the case.
It seems to me we make more mistakes now. But one
Well-
thing I found interesting is how many of the names of the people are in everyday language now. You know, like we talk about Brickell Avenue and Lauderdale, and we just assume they've always been there. But of course, they're all to do with people who did something for the area.
Well, that's right. As the same as the namesake of Boynton Beach, you know,
Yes.
they're all named for it. But, you know, so much of history, there was a lot of research that I did for the book, but thankfully it was all, almost all, documented by previous historians and others who wrote and preserved a lot of that. And then I, you know, was fortunate enough to be able to simply refer to it and give it appropriate credits in the book and acknowledge it in the book. But, you know, there's so much history that's kind of sitting away in historical libraries and research libraries that we don't really, the average person just doesn't have the time or the inclination, or doesn't even know sometimes that it exists. And that's why historical societies like Boynton Beach Historical Society and my friends at the Fort Lauderdale Historical Society and others, it's so important, the work that you do, to try and point these things out to people and get them interested in knowing a little bit more about their area. I talk about, you know, moving things from dusty archives and getting them back into a form that a current, today's audience might read. My publisher, the History Press, which is part of Arcadia Publishing, I really like what they're doing. I'm sure that, in fact, I believe I read the Boynton Beach book from Arcadia Publishing. And what they're doing is they're taking, they're helping authors take these stories that may not be an inch thick or 2-inch thick book like Towers in the Sand was, but putting them out in a format that's easy to read. Chapters are relatively short. It's 150 or so pages. It's something that somebody could read in a weekend. It's not something that they have to commit the next 3 or 4 months of their life to reading. And I think that's very smart. And I look forward to working with the History Press to try and bring some more of these stories out of the dusty archives and into the current lexicon.
And that's why it's so important for people to donate their archives.
Absolutely.
Because, all of my Miss Gillian School of Dancing, that's all been donated. I have the originals, but of course, when I'm gone, the originals will be there. But people sometimes don't realize how very important that is.
You're absolutely right. That people have shared their photos, have shared, correspondence and other things, has really made it possible to preserve so much of this. And archivists that go through the sometimes I'm sure torturous work of trying to archive all of that material. I have great admiration for them. Surely there must be questions from some other audience members, or did they all leave?
Oh, they're there. I
There.
don't see anyone with a hand raised, and there's nothing on chat. If you would like to ask a question, you can unmute yourself, or
I couldn't get the chat to go through, but is this new river still there? Is that the one that runs through Fort Lauderdale? And the other question is, when did it become Palm Beach County and Broward and Dade County?
Oh goodness, you're gonna make it difficult for me. The first question is easy. Yes, New River is the river that runs right straight smack dab through the middle of downtown Fort Lauderdale. If you're familiar with Las Olas Boulevard, that's in Mary Brickell's estate, where Colee Hammock is located. But the river runs straight through it and is still a very popular river. Thankfully, because recent efforts have tried to be better about preserving our natural waterways, it's cleaned up a little bit after they dug the canals and connected one of the Lake Okeechobee canals to New River. It silted up and became really dirty, and there were fish kills and everything else, but they've managed to clean up quite a bit of that. And there are just hundreds of boats, thousands of boats that make way up and down that river, on an average weekend. So, it's very much alive and well, and people are still enjoying it. But in each of our areas, there's a river, a waterway like that. The canal that runs next to Southern Boulevard in West Palm Beach is another canal that's connected to, that was dredged and connected to Lake Okeechobee as part of that effort. I called it a scheme. I'll still call it a scheme to drain the Everglades and turn it all into commercial land. But thankfully that wasn't possible. It didn't happen. And maybe some of these efforts to try and restore some of the Everglades will come to fruition. Now, your question with regard to the other counties, I would honestly have to refer back to my notes to be able to tell you the specific dates. But originally, Dade County went all the way up to the St. Lucie Inlet. North of there was Brevard County. Then shortly after that, the Dade County seat moved back to Miami, and Brevard County's line came down to a diagonal line from Lake Okeechobee to about Hallandale, the Hallandale Inlet. And I just don't recall those specific dates. Palm Beach County was carved out of that, Broward County was obviously carved out of it. I think that those dates are mentioned in my book, not necessarily prominently, but Betty, if you want to go on my website, you can leave me a message, DonnColeeWriter.com. You could leave me a note on that, and I'd be happy to look those dates up for you on in my files.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Has everybody been fairly successful, or I hope that you all have been fairly successful starting to get jobs?
Longest river in the United States.
Randall?
Well, Don, we thank you so much for being with us
My
tonight. And again, I really appreciated your book, and I certainly learned more things about the New River, and I also just like the research that you did to kind of solve that mystery of your family, and just to see how there were two different families involved
Yeah,
in that story.
It really is interesting, and the pronunciation of the name. My part of the family has always pronounced it Colee, but in St. Augustine, they still pronounce it Colee. How they get Colee out of C-O-L-E-E, I don't know, but that's the way they pronounce it. And that's one of the clues in terms of what was the actual massacre that happened. And that story, as you read it in the book, Randall, that narrative about it was written by Dr. Cooper Kirk, who was the longtime historian of the Broward County Historical Archives, which was a county organization at that time. And actually the Broward County Historical Commission, which was created by the county government. But his research and in some cases imagination and thinking about what happened in that tragic thing was just gripping. So I had to just lift it and put it right in my book with credits to Dr. Kirk. There was a lot credited to Dr. Kirk in my book.
That was a great find to see that.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's that story had been from the time I was growing up and would visit relatives in St. Augustine. They talk about the Colee Massacre, and so it had been around for a long time. How it got started exactly, I don't know. I mentioned that in the book that it was possibly a public relations effort on behalf of Fort Lauderdale, stuck between the glitzy Palm Beach and the soon-to-be glitzy Miami Beach, wanting to make some sort of a name for itself. And that may have been how the story took wings, if you will. Well, thank you again. I appreciate it. Everyone on the Zoom call, I appreciate you all being here. I hope you enjoy it. I'd hope you'll consider buying the book, and hope you enjoy it. Let me know. You can go to
we do thank you so much, and we're going to present a copy of your book to the Boynton Beach City Library.
Great.
We'll be in the Boynton Beach History Reading Room, so it'll be there, and it will be shown that it was given by the Boynton Beach Historical Society in your honor. And we really appreciate you being with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night.